And the more pain you experience, the more dopamine you can achieve if you get back on the avenue of pursuit.
This is about more energy, and it's about more clarity and less time wasted.
It's not just picking a particular disease and trying to figure out what the recipe is that the one size fits all, but it's really a journey that we have our whole lives.
If something's valuable, you'll make sacrifices to attain it. We could let go of something we value in the present, and we would gain something we value even more in the future.
Because if you think about most of the growth in life comes from these rigidly externally imposed schedules, and we hate them. But they are where we learn restraint.
Because once you're real about it, then you can make progress. But if your energy cycles go to bullshitting yourself, you'll never get out of it.
When you wake up in the morning, you are in a perfect position to what I call receive the download of all the work that your neural circuitry has been doing the night before. But if you immediately go to a sensory experience, especially a rich sensory experience of stuff scrolling by, you're actually missing the information that you processed at night. And even more importantly, that second half of the night during REM sleep is when the emotional weight of things becomes, let's say, you put it on the shelf properly. Things that are important to emotionally register get put in one shelf. Things that were like the comment you got on Twitter that was triggering doesn't seem like such a big deal after a good night's sleep. And that's because that second half of sleep is actually when you re-experience these things, but your body can't secrete adrenaline. It's kind of an internal form of therapy or even trauma therapy. And that's why people who don't get that sleep are very, they're easily agitated. They feel like the world is crushing down on them. So when I wake up in the morning, I want to receive ideas that I want to learn from my learning. And if you take in new information, you are not in a position to do that. And 60 minutes is a tough one. So I give myself 2 no-goes for the 60-minute block if I can do it. And I'll tell you, a lot of mornings I fail, Tom. I don't do it.
Interesting.
I make it
I found that shocking,
you know?
but I heard you say that in another interview, and I was like,
well, I mean, I'm human. There are mornings where I get enticed, or worse, I find myself reflexively picking up the phone without having made the conscious decision. And that's when I realized that, we are all deep in this process, and I think we have to regulate it. The experiment I'd like to do, maybe you'll do this with me as a challenge, because a challenge is always good, is in the new year, I actually want to take every odd waking hour of the day off the phone. So even hours of the day, as long as it's waking, I'm willing to have it on and work with it. But odd hours, just turn it off, no matter what. I don't know if this will destroy most of the relationships in my life, but just to see, can I do it on a rigidly externally imposed schedule? Because if you think about most of the growth in life comes from these rigidly externally imposed schedules, and we hate them. But they are where we learn restraint.
Identity to me is something that's practical. It's your identity is it's like a dramatic role that you play out in the world. And while playing that out, it has to furnish you with a life. And what that means is that it has to be negotiated with other people. And when you're a very young child and you first start to play with who you are, you live in a fantasy world. And according to some developmental psychologists, at least, particularly this is grounded in the theories of Piaget, that very young children, 2 or 3, are quite egocentric in their play. They play according to their own rules. And so they're not social yet until they're 3 or 4, which means that they have their own goals in mind. And then they erect a little fictional world around those goals. And then they play out the role within that fictional world. And that's pretend play. And when they get to be about 3 or 4 and they start playing with other kids, they have to bring their worlds together and negotiate, because both children have to want to play. And so that means identity has to expand beyond its egocentric focus and increasingly be negotiated in the social world. I studied developmental psychology for a long time, especially in relationship to the regulation of aggression. And most children learn to regulate their aggression between the ages of 2 and 4. Now, for example, for instance, there's a subset of children, mostly male, who are very aggressive at the age of 2, comparatively speaking. They bite, kick, fight, hit, and steal. That's the definition of aggressive. And almost all those children are socialized out of that by the time they're 4, although a small proportion aren't, and they tend to be long-term antisocial children and then criminal adults. It's very, very difficult for that to be rectified if it isn't rectified by 4. What happens with most children is they learn to move beyond their egocentric presuppositions and include other children in the play. And so they start to negotiate the roles. And a sophisticated identity is a negotiated role. And so it's not appropriate for anyone to...
Negotiated with who?
With everyone. With everyone. And of course, you know this is the case because well, first of all, if you're a child and you want friends, then you can't insist that only your game be played. So I'll give you an example. There's been observational studies of children in playgrounds. So imagine there's a group of children together, let's say they're 6 or 7 years old, and they're playing helicopter. So they've got their erasers out and they're buzzing around in the helicopters. Okay, so they've already established the ground rules. They've got together and they laid out the drama. They say, well, let's play helicopter. And maybe there's 4 or 5 suggestions, but the group develops a consensus that helicopter's the fun game. And let's make our erasers into helicopters. I don't have an eraser. Well, you can use your pencil and it can be a long helicopter. And so everybody gets a roll and everybody's happy about it. Otherwise, play won't continue, right? Everybody has to be happy or play won't continue. And so then the little drama organizes itself and the kids play helicopter and there's consequences of that play out like a story. And then maybe another kid comes along and he's got an eraser and a pencil in his bag and he wants to play helicopter too. And if he's a socially sophisticated kid, he'll hang around the outside of the little game and watch. And then he'll take out his eraser and maybe start making buzzing noises with it. And when he can see that there's an opening in the play situation, he'll swoop in and maybe he'll get integrated. It's like when you're at a cocktail party and you hear a conversation and you're hovering around the edge, you wait for an opening and then you say something that's germane to the topic. And if you're sophisticated enough and the people are friendly enough, then it'll open and you'll be allowed in. Now, even popular kids often get rebuffed when they try to enter an already structured game. Unpopular kids don't watch what's going on, and then they come along and try to impose their game on the entire group, and then they have a tantrum if they don't get let in. And so that's a good example of how identity is negotiated at the earliest stages.
We have to construct a narrative about it that moves us forward. And this is why I'm such a firm believer that you should do and believe that which moves you towards your goals. People get the do part. They understand their actions should be actions that take them towards what they want to accomplish. But people often miss the most important part, which is only to believe things that move you towards your goals. And I see people every day that tell themselves a story about themselves that they are worthless, that they're meaningless, that they're pointless, that their friends and family would be better off if they just died. So we have to find a way to construct a narrative about ourselves that empowers us, that lifts us up, even though we make mistakes, even though we fall down, even though we're never going to get things right all the time, and even though terrible things happen to us, or maybe we do terrible things. But in that, the erosion of the self, that's the danger. The erosion of the self, that is the danger. And when I talk to people about the 80-20 principle, 80% of the time you should be focused on the things that you love, the beautiful things that you want to bring to this world, the beautiful things that are already in the world. And 20% of the time you should be kicking yourself in your ass and saying you can do better. It's such a powerful idea. But the problem is when people get to the 20%, they forget that it's only supposed to be 20% of the time. And that it's meant to be these acute moments where you're pushing yourself to be more, to do more. It isn't so you can tear yourself down. That's why you have to do and believe that which moves you towards your goals. And if thinking that you're a worthless piece of shit moves you to your goals somehow, then fine, do it. But I can't literally fathom a universe in which that would be a logical way to move forward.
Can you give people a really fast, because I want to get back to what an ideal fast looks like according to Fast This Way. But first, give people a quick breakdown about how you put your body in a state where it will produce ketones and exactly what they are.
Ketones are what happens when your body burns fat instead of sugar. Naturally, it doesn't happen if you're consuming carbohydrates in any meaningful amount, and it doesn't happen if you're eating a ton of protein. And what happens when you do that is ketones have more energy in them than glucose does. And the neurons in your brain love ketones. In fact, all the cells in your body do, but some of them prefer blood glucose. So all of a sudden you get this feeling of clarity. And the natural way to get into ketosis is you fast for about 2 days for the average person, sometimes 3. And then the body says, I got nothing here. I better start burning my fat stores. So it liberates some fat from the fat stores, and all the toxins from the fat it liberates as well, which is why it's good to mop them up while you're fasting. And then your cells get this and they go, oh man, we've got to reformat our power plants because they're used to only having sugar. So it takes metabolic energy to transform, and they literally change their shape and function so that they're better at consuming fat. Right, and that takes a while. Now you're metabolically flexible, but if you do that all the time forever, your cells are like, why would I ever be configured to do glucose? I live in a world with no sugar. So they aren't very good at that, which is why cycling in and out of ketosis, fasting some of the time, but not other times, and not fasting the same way every day or every week is really powerful. You want to keep the body a little bit off balance. So it's like, you know what? I'm ready to make energy at any time, rapidly, from any type of fuel. And when you do that, you can actually go out and have a bowl of hopefully dairy-free ice cream without bad fats in it, so a coconut-based ice cream, and with real sugar and everything. And you know what'll happen? Your blood sugar will go up and come right back down, and you'll be fine. And that's a metabolically flexible person. You do it all the time, you won't be metabolically flexible, right? But if you're the guy who has ice cream every single night, well, then what's going to happen is you're not going to know how to burn fat whatsoever. Your body's going to be only sugar burning, and it's not going to work, and your blood sugar will always be high. So the idea is occasionally it's okay to have some carbs. I don't recommend, ice cream as a major source, but honestly, if you're intermittent fasting, you're occasionally in ketosis, you ought to be able to eat a treat that isn't full of inflammatory stuff like bad oils and all and be just fine. And the evidence is that people whose metabolisms work really well, they can do it and their blood sugar doesn't go bonkers.
Well, so as a medical doctor, I train in internal medicine, which means that I take care of young and old, men and women, healthy and sick. I have spent most of my career not only in sort of the center, the thick of the current of modern medicine, which is largely about prescriptions and largely about diagnosing and treating disease. The thing that's different about me, though, is I started realizing with all the successes we've had, new treatments for 12 different types of cancers that didn't exist before, that we were really only tackling part of the equation, because wouldn't it be much better if we could actually prevent the disease in the first place? And what's interesting is the same science that teaches us how to intercept and tackle a disease using drugs actually teaches us, in some ways, a hell of a lot more about how to prevent the disease in the first place. How do we actually, not just pick up the pieces after the time bomb explodes or the stick of dynamite, but how do we actually pull the fuse out or disarm the time bomb, right? So that's what got me really interested in diverting my scientific focus from treatments to taking a look at prevention. Now, if you're talking about disease, it's pretty straightforward. Diagnose it, find a treatment, write a prescription, refer to a specialist. If you're talking about prevention, you're really talking about health. And this brings me full circle to where you started, where we're starting. So what is health, right? I mean, I'm just like everyone else. Well, are you healthy? Well, if I'm not sick, I'm actually healthy, right? So in most people's minds, including mine, not being sick is kind of the default definition of being healthy. But that is very problematic, because the absence of something, the absence of disease, is impossible to operationalize. You can't do something about the absence of something else. So that's what I started to ask. Well, what is health if it's not just the lack of disease? Well, it turns out that, and this has been my research, it turns out that health is not just the absence of disease, it is the result of our body's own hardwired defense systems, health defense systems that we're born with. These are defense systems are formed in the womb before we're born. And the moment we appear on planet Earth, our health defenses are firing on all cylinders from day one all the way to our very last breath. And all of a sudden, that gives us a whole new canvas to understand what can we do to support health? What can we do to boost our body's health defenses?
You see, if you have a functional identity, when you act it out in the world, then you get what you want and need. And if an identity doesn't do that, well, then you either retool your identity or you retool the world.
Your
Now,
conception of the world?
Well, if you're retooling your conception of the world, then you're retooling yourself. No, you can actually, I mean, what a revolutionary does is try to bring the world into alignment with
literally
their
change
theory.
the world.
Yes, literally. Well, and we all do that to some degree because we are practical engineers, you know. I mean, not only do we perceive the world, but we also interact with it so that it does manifest itself in accordance with our desires. There's limits, obviously, to how far you can go or how far you should go with that. You know, and what are the limits? Well, there's practical limits. Nature won't do what you want it to unless you're very sophisticated in your application of your knowledge, and other people will object. So now you might say, well, you should forge forward regardless of their objection. And, you know, there are circumstances under which that's true. But generally speaking, that's not a very good idea. It certainly doesn't make you popular as a child. And so that brings up one other issue. I would also say, and I developed this idea quite a bit in the new book. You go from egocentrism as a child, you have to go through this period where you're socialized as a child and adolescent. And that really means that you allow your identity to be molded and shaped by the group. And, you know, you think about how important friends and peers are to children and adolescents. You know, your mother will say when you're a teenager, well, if Johnny jumped off the bridge, would you too? And you say, well, no, but the real answer is, well, probably. If all your friends are there taunting you, you would in fact jump off the bridge. And not only that, generally speaking, you should, because it's your duty, it's your developmental duty as a child and a teenager to take your isolated self and turn it into a functioning social unit. Now, you could say, well, Peterson wants everybody to be a functional social unit, a robot, you know, a cog in the wheel. And I would say, well, that isn't where development stops. It has to go through that period before you can emerge as a genuine individual, which means you have to know the rules of the game before you can break them. But not being able to abide by the rules is not anything like being a genuine creative individual. Those are not the same thing. And there's plenty of attempt to confuse the two things, because it's much better, if you can't follow the rules, to view yourself as a avant-garde revolutionary than as a failure.
When I became an entrepreneur, knew nothing about it, and I was who's the kid in the server room, and I was the only one with an office that had no windows, and there were like 9 other computers in my room, and nobody knew who I was, and the only contribution I made to phone calls was to say goodbye at the end of a conference call. I'm not kidding. 10 years later, I own a $1 billion business. Woo! Who the fuck is laughing now? But it only worked because I didn't mind looking stupid. It only worked because I wasn't asking myself whether I was worthy or whether I deserved it. I just asked myself, am I leaving it all out on the field? Yes or no? Am I learning? Yes or no? And if I'm not, I didn't go, oh, that makes me a bad person. I went, I need to change my actions to get a different result. And once you start thinking like that, and you literally value yourself for how hard you're trying, how much you're learning, how willing you are to accept when you fall on your face, that you don't try to get out from under it or campaign to convince people that you're better than you really are. Fucking own where you're at. Because once you're real about it, then you can make progress. But if your energy cycles go to bullshitting yourself, you'll never get out of it.
Before we started rolling though, I had this whole interview planned. I knew exactly where we were gonna go. And then you made a comment. I was bringing up Bitcoin and cryptocurrency as I do because I'm obsessed. And you said, well, there's only one biological currency, and that's dopamine.
That's right.
And I was like, well, now I know where we're starting. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so, human beings have evolved tons of technologies and currencies. Bitcoin, Ethereum are not topics I know a lot about. But when you think about dollar, euro, Bitcoin, Ethereum, you think about wins and losses in sport, in life, in relationship, in anything. Something in your brain and body has to keep track of that. Did you win? Did you lose? What's a letdown? What's a celebration? And I think one of the most important findings in the last few years in neuroscience is that while the molecule dopamine is associated with reward, it's more about motivation and craving. There's a really classic experiment now that people use to demonstrate this. You take two rats, and the rats independently, separate cages, can lever press for food, and they can access food. There's a little bit of dopamine that's released anytime they get some food. So we always thought that food, like many other rewards, like food, sex, warmth when you're cold, cool when you're too warm, is triggering the release of dopamine. But someone had the good idea to deplete dopamine in one of those animals. And then what you find is that the animal without dopamine still enjoys food, still enjoys other pleasures. So dopamine's not really involved in the enjoyment of those pleasures. It's involved in motivation, because if you make the animal have to move just one rat's length, believe it or not, to get to that lever, the animal with dopamine will work to go get that thing. It will work through some effort to go get the reward. Whereas the animal, or it turns out the human without much dopamine, can still experience pleasure. They can sit on their couch and cram their face with pleasure-inducing calories or what have you, watch pleasure-inducing things on the television, but they have very little motivation to go pursue things that will deliver them pleasure.
There are different types of immunotherapy. Broadly speaking, immunotherapy is harnessing your body's own immune system to fight the cancer, which is different than inventing a toxic drug or even a smart bomb, a targeted drug to actually go after the cancer. So immunotherapy relies on your immune system. It is true what you just said. There are some very specific kinds of immune systems where you can remove your immune system, reprogram it, kind of turn it from, turn it from an ordinary immune cell into a super soldier, okay, and then inject it back in the body, and it will go after the cancer. But there are other forms of immune therapy where what you're doing, and this is what I was talking about, cancers like to develop these sneaky ways of hiding from your immune system. They cloak themselves. Like the old Star Trek, the Klingons would turn on a cloaking device, and now the Enterprise can't find the enemy ship, okay? Well, that's what cancers actually do. Some immunotherapies, all they do is they rip the cloak off the cancer, and the regular immune system goes, aha, I see you. I'm going to come after you, and I'm going to get you. Because what keeps you and I from actually developing lethal cancers right here, right now, Tom, is that our immune system is spotting little tiny harmless microscopic cancers and saying, I see you, you're gone. Okay, you're dead meat, and they just clear off. It's like taking an eraser, just erasing the cancer right off the chalkboard. All right. So when you uncloak the cancer, it allows your immune system to do this. The best example of this is former US President Jimmy Carter. When he was in his 90s, he developed a melanoma that had spread to his liver and his brain. And, it was at that point, this is about 10 years ago now, almost 10 years ago, a brain metastasis from a skin cancer, melanoma, is pretty much a death sentence. And so he happened to be one of the first people to actually get a treatment that ripped the cloak off of the melanoma cells in his brain and elsewhere. And it allowed his 90-year-old immune system to see that cancer. And even at that age, even with that spread, he had all of his cancer cleared out of his system.
Can you give people a really fast, because I want to get back to what an ideal fast looks like according to Fast This Way. But first, give people a quick breakdown about how you put your body in a state where it will produce ketones and exactly what they are.
Ketones are what happens when your body burns fat instead of sugar. Naturally, it doesn't happen if you're consuming carbohydrates in any meaningful amount, and it doesn't happen if you're eating a ton of protein. And what happens when you do that is ketones have more energy in them than glucose does. And the neurons in your brain love ketones. In fact, all the cells in your body do, but some of them prefer blood glucose. So all of a sudden you get this feeling of clarity. And the natural way to get into ketosis is you fast for about 2 days for the average person, sometimes 3. And then the body says, I got nothing here. I better start burning my fat stores. So it liberates some fat from the fat stores, and all the toxins from the fat it liberates as well, which is why it's good to mop them up while you're fasting. And then your cells get this and they go, oh man, we've got to reformat our power plants because they're used to only having sugar. So it takes metabolic energy to transform, and they literally change their shape and function so that they're better at consuming fat. Right, and that takes a while. Now you're metabolically flexible, but if you do that all the time forever, your cells are like, why would I ever be configured to do glucose? I live in a world with no sugar. So they aren't very good at that, which is why cycling in and out of ketosis, fasting some of the time, but not other times, and not fasting the same way every day or every week is really powerful. You want to keep the body a little bit off balance. So it's like, you know what? I'm ready to make energy at any time, rapidly, from any type of fuel. And when you do that, you can actually go out and have a bowl of hopefully dairy-free ice cream without bad fats in it, so a coconut-based ice cream, and with real sugar and everything. And it'll happen, your blood sugar will go up and come right back down, and you'll be fine. And that's a metabolically flexible person. You do it all the time, you won't be metabolically flexible, right? But if you're the guy who has ice cream every single night, well, then what's going to happen is you're not going to know how to burn fat whatsoever. Your body's going to be only sugar burning, and it's not going to work, and your blood sugar will always be high. So the idea is occasionally it's okay to have some carbs. I don't recommend, ice cream as a major source, but honestly, if you're intermittent fasting, you're occasionally in ketosis, you ought to be able to eat a treat that isn't full of inflammatory stuff like bad oils and all and be just fine. And the evidence is that people whose metabolisms work really well, they can do it and their blood sugar doesn't go bonkers.
In our phenomenological landscape, so that's the world as we experience it, complete with emotions and motivations and dreams. And so the full range of human experience, including the subjective and the objective, let's say, can broadly be broken into 2 domains. And one is the domain of things that are beyond our grasp and reach, and that's the unknown. The unknown emerges. When the unknown emerges, you tend to experience anxiety. And then there's the known, and I define the known very specifically and very carefully. The known is the place you are when what you're doing produces the results you want. And I say want because that brings motivation and emotion into the game. So you're motivated to pursue something. You pursue it, and what you want happens. Not only do you get what you want, but you get validation for the structure that governs your perceptions and your actions. Now, if you imagine that you're lonely and you approach a young woman in a social situation, attempting to make some contact with her, you want to alleviate your loneliness. And so you hope you make a good impression, and you tell a joke, let's say in a relatively awkward manner, and you get rebuffed, then you feel you're no longer where you control. You're no longer where you exercise control. And that brings up all sorts of specters immediately. It's like, well, why were you rebuffed? Well, maybe all women are to be despised. That's one theory. Maybe there's something deeply wrong with you. Maybe you're having an off day. Maybe it wasn't a very good joke. And so when you don't get what you want, then a landscape of questions emerge, and those questions can resonate through different levels of your identity, from the trivial, oh, I told the joke wrong, to the profound, there's nothing desirable about me and I'll be alone for the rest of my life. Now, you asked about identity, and I used the example of a child's game, but I could go through an identity. And so I do this particularly in maps of meaning. And so, for example, let's say I'm sitting typing. Okay, we could decompose my identity. So at the highest level of resolution, I'm moving my fingers. And so that could be my identity. I'm the thing that moves its fingers. And then at a slightly broader level than that, I'm typing words. And at a broader level, I'm typing phrases and thinking them up, and then sentences, and then paragraphs, and then chapters, and then, let's say, full papers or books. That's a productive unit. So I'm the author of a book or the author of a paper. That's an identity. But then that's nested inside, for me, it would be nested inside being a clinical psychologist, being a professor, being a good citizen. And then that's nested inside something that's even broader than that. And I would say that that's nested inside a cultural heroism. And I don't mean that specific to me. I mean that for everyone. That's the outermost level, whether you're playing out the role of hero or adversary, say, that's the highest possible level of identity. That's the level at which fundamental morality is adjudicated. And there isn't really anything beyond. Outside that it's beyond us. It's the transcendent itself. And you're all of those at any one time. You're all of those levels of identity.
I think all of us should have some form of that fear, which, if you didn't hear, is to have a vision of the person you could become and to reach the pearly gates, as it were, see who you could have been, contrast it with who you actually are, and be disappointed by the gap between them. And I love chasing that. I think it's a beautiful chase. But what I hope you guys will do, if you ever find yourself at the pearly gates disappointed in how much farther you could have gone, to simply ask one question of yourself every day. Did I give it my all today?
Dopamine is the neurochemistry of the pursuit of making sure that I have the energy to go. But do we know how we can spike that?
Well, first of all, it's clear to me based on your description that you've tapped into these channels that release dopamine, because craving and wanting, whether or not it's sex or money or connection or anything, all right, that's the primary trigger for dopamine release. Yep. Now, sex and reproduction makes the most sense from the perspective of evolution. I mean, any species, every species tends to have two primary goals. One, protect its young, and second, make more of itself, usually in reverse order, right? So even for people that don't want children, I mean, you might not, or people, of course, not everyone is having sex just to reproduce, but at a primordial level, that's what those circuits are there for. So every species, in particular mammalian species where there's a lot of parenting and caretaking of the young, tries to make more of itself. And everything that you see, like maternal aggression, which is a powerful circuit that gets activated after females of any species, in particular mammals, give birth, they will fight to the death and they gain superhuman strength in order to protect their young. There's a known circuit for that in the brain that gets activated once a female has offspring, and it's robust.
What's the ideal split for you?
The ideal split is whatever you'll do. And 16-8 is great, but for especially
so 16
women
hours of
around,
not eating, and then I eat however much I want in an 8-hour window, or do you put limitations in the eating window?
You can eat as much as you want during the window.
Of Twinkies?
You can, and you'll still get benefits, to be perfectly honest. You'll just get more benefits if you eat good stuff during the window. And that's the other thing. Okay, maybe you don't want to go grass-fed only. Maybe you don't want to eliminate French fries from your universe. Okay, fine. Intermittent fasting will help everybody, even on a complete crap diet. However, you'll be more hungry during an intermittent fast if you eat crap. So you got to deal with that. And ideally, what you're eating after you break your fast, you can have carbs or not have carbs, but don't have sugar, don't have seed oils, and eat grass-fed meat or don't eat meat. And if you follow those basic principles, and there's other nuances in there, what you find is that you feel really good. And the next morning, you wake up and you're not ravenous. And you're like, oh yeah, I don't even want breakfast. And that's a very liberating thing. Because if we're spending so many of our thoughts every day on food, and then you just aren't hungry, it really changes things. So I want millions of people to say, I'm going to try this basic thing. I'm not going to worry about getting my diet perfect. I might make a few changes, but I'm just going to learn how to intermittent fast. And what I don't want them to do is what a lot of the fasting community does, where it's all about the fast. And every month I'm going to fast for a week. And what you end up doing is you get people who become, they basically burn out their adrenals. And so women see sleep problems as the first symptom that they're overdoing it. And then they see hormonal problems in their monthly cycle, and then see hair loss and hair thinning. Guys, same thing, but it's usually 2 to 4 weeks out for women. First is sleep problems, then you wake up and there isn't a kickstand, and then you...
That took me a second.
Took you a minute.
I got there, yeah.
And then after that, you can see hair thinning as well. And this is from excess cortisol because you overdid it. And you can see the same thing from just being keto for 3 months straight, right? That's why I've always recommended cycling, because I made all these mistakes when I was learning about all this stuff. It was just very early days. And so how do you make this sustainable? And the truth is, fasting the same way every day is bad for you because it doesn't lend your body the idea of metabolic flexibility. It's like, oh, I live in a world where there's almost never enough food. So have breakfast every now and then. At least, Saturday morning, have breakfast with your family. And you can have a keto breakfast, or you can have the gluten-free waffles, whatever you want. You should be able to handle that. Just don't eat bad oils. And over time, it takes about 2 years to replace half of your cell membranes, the oil in those membranes. Over time, you'll become more and more metabolically flexible because your cells work better. But if while you're intermittent fasting, you're still eating a ton of junk food, you won't get that benefit, but you'll get many other benefits of fasting. You're still going to lose weight. You're still going to have an improved blood sugar profile, but not as good as if you made a few changes in the diet. So this is something everyone can do that's cheaper and more convenient than what you do in the morning right now.
I can create rules in my life, and then I really stick to those rules. So once I'm very careful about what rules I put in place, because I have to believe that they will actually lead me to this goal that's really exciting for me. But if I believe it, then I can put them in. And then also part of my identity is that I'm the type of person that when I set a rule, I follow it. So I can create this loop of like feeling good about myself and the thing that I'm pursuing, but it really works. And I'm shocked how few people have the kind of rule that you're talking about in the new year to say, hey, I'm only gonna do odd hours, there's no phone.
Yeah, well, and like I said, I'm not perfect. I'm not as disciplined as you are about my no-goes. I try. I actually find that tabulating is kind of fun. It's also fun to get really triggering comments and to not close the dopamine loop for them. I think if people understood the dopamine reward prediction error, that we could end all the amplifying comment battles online. Because what happens is if someone takes a jab at you of any kind, there's actually an open dopamine loop waiting for you to respond. And any response actually gives them that dopamine response of success. It's a little bit of it's like scoring a 3-pointer. And the no response actually drops their dopamine below baseline. And that's its own form of retaliation. And I have to be careful because I don't want to encourage people to retaliate. But anything that short circuits the kind of madness of getting pulled into some online battle that's totally meaningless, it's taking people away from other powerful, good things that they could do in the world. We've been talking mainly about dopamine and its scheduling and about the fact that it can be attached to anything. I think many people find it hard to subjectively attach dopamine to something they don't want to do. This is something that if we'd spoken a year ago, my answer would have been a little bit different to the question of how do you get motivated? Well, one way to do that is if you are good at subjectively attaching dopamine to the pursuit, just knowing, okay, I really am hungry for this. I'm going to tell myself that, making it 1% of the way is a success, and I'm going to keep going and I'm going to keep ratcheting on. And that's great if you can do that. But for people that can't do that, understanding this relationship with the pleasure-pain balance can be more powerful. Just understanding the more friction and pain that you experience, the greater the dopamine reward you will get later. And that serves as its own amplifier of the whole process of pursuing more dopamine. And then the other aspect of it is that anytime that we're leaning into action, it has the possibility of being an amplifying process or a depleting process. And the key to that is making sure that you're balancing the dopamine and epinephrine systems. Epinephrine being this molecule of universal currency of energy output. It could be out of hate or it could be out of love. Epinephrine doesn't care. And actually dopamine doesn't care. None of these systems care about us. They just work underneath our conscious control. But when you start to understand that hitting the gas pedal is great, but hitting the gas pedal and then coming off the gas pedal a little bit, you can kind of sit in a more relaxed RPM, actually allows you to go much further. I think that people leaning into action is terrific. I always say you can either be back on your heels, flat-footed, or forward center of mass. The best situation is actually to be right upright, but just know that you can be forward center of mass at any point. And to take it back to sex and reproduction, because it's a salient example, the arc of sex is very interesting because when you think about autonomic arousal, it turns out that the arousal stage of sex actually involves release of dopamine, but is what we call parasympathetic dominant. It actually has to be relaxed enough in order to occur.
It's not about weight loss even. It's really about health. And because when I was doing my research to look at different foods that would activate our health defenses, here's the first thing I was surprised by. It's not like one food or two foods or five foods, it was more than 200 different kinds of foods. And they were fruits, and they were vegetables, and they were spices, and they were legumes, and they were different kinds of seafood, including shellfish, and they were different kinds of fish beyond salmon. Okay. And there's even some dairy products that can actually have some benefits as well, including fermented foods like yogurt and sauerkraut and kimchi. And these foods are so ubiquitous that they are found in the traditional cultures of every single society, but especially Mediterranean diet, which we know is healthier for us as a pattern, and Asian food, which we also know is healthier. And so what I started to realize is that eating to beat disease is not just picking a particular disease and trying to figure out what the recipe is, that the one size fits all, but it's really a journey that we have our whole lives from the time we're small until we get old. We get older. Parents have the opportunity to actually start feeding their children as soon as they're taking solid foods that can actually help them beat disease. In fact, breastfeeding is actually helping your child beat disease by shaping and sculpting their microbiome, right? One of the health defense systems. So I came up with 200 different foods. I lay them all out according to which health defense systems they activate. Some cases they activate all of the health defense systems. I call those grand slammers because, man, a single food will knock the 5 health defense systems out of the park. It's a home run to eat those things. And I explain all the research that's been done by myself and other people to show how they actually work. So what's the principle? To eat to beat disease, you can love your food to love your health. Love your food to love your health. That seems so contradictory to what we used to think about healthy food, right? Because the old thinking is that, well, you got to eat healthy, you got to cut out everything you love, And I'm turning that upside down and inside out. I'm inverting the whole equation. I'm saying, if you look at those 200 foods that I put down in my book, Eat to Beat Disease, take a Sharpie out and circle the ones that you love already. I like this. I like that one. Tomatoes I like. Oh man, I like this one. Okay, that's a great starting point because if you start eating those foods, you're already ahead of the game because you already love foods that can actually that can activate your health defenses. Now you can expand your horizons by choosing these other foods that are out there as well. If you sat on TV and watched the Food Network, you can find all these people experimenting with different ingredients. If you go onto YouTube, you can look for an ingredient you don't recognize, bitter melon. The heck is a bitter melon? Well, it's an Asian gourd. Is it bitter? Absolutely, but there are ways of actually cooking it so that it's not so bitter and it has medicinal value. Well, how would I do it? Click on YouTube and search on recipe, cooking bitter melon, and you'll watch somebody teach it to you. So love your food to love your health, explore with your life, and just know that the foods I put in the book activate your body's health defenses.
What is a good entry point where they're not hangry, they're not going crazy, but they're still getting some benefits, anti-inflammatory, they're maybe in ketosis, they've got some autophagy going on? Like, what does that starter kit fast look like?
All right. I'm going to explain that right here. I'm also going to offer, because I was a teacher for 5 years at the University of California, I realized every book I've written, I haven't really been a great teacher of the content. I just write them like you should read it. When people order Fast This Way and send the receipt to fastthisway.com, I will teach you this over 2 weeks, like every morning, explaining, walking people through this who are new to fasting, ending in a 1 or 2 day spiritual fast. So that's the long answer to the question. Is it's going to take me 2 weeks, but I'll show you. The short answer is that do 12 hours without food. See if you can do that if you've never done it before. That's not really technically an intermittent fast. You're just showing yourself you've got legs. And you work yourself up to 14 hours without food. And that's when you're really starting a real intermittent fast. And then you maybe the next day you have breakfast. Just lots of protein, lots of fat, no carbs for breakfast, right? You're taking it easy. And then the next day, okay, I'm going to do a 16-hour fast. And you may use all three of the fasting hacks because you're ravenous. When I was 300 pounds, if you told me I was going to skip breakfast and lunch, I'm like, I will kill the people around me. Like, I will be such a jerk. And it was true. I ate 6 or 8 times a day because I knew I'd go into starvation mode if I didn't, and all this like mental garbage we've been told. So what you end up with is this idea where you're slowly going to work your way up, and it's okay to do that. And some mornings someone's going to bring in donuts and you're just going to break your fast. And in the book, I explain the psychology and the biology of why that happens. And it's okay, right? You have the rest of your life to do this. That's why it's called a fasting practice. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And once you get up to that 16:8, one day you're going to sit there and go, you know what? It's lunchtime, but I'm actually not that hungry. So I am going to, for the first time in my adult life, I'm going to just say, I'm not going to eat till dinner. And then you're really kind of tricking yourself because it's only like 4 or 5 more hours until you'd had dinner anyway. And then you're going, wait a minute. The last time I ate was dinner yesterday. But it wasn't pain. It wasn't suffering. It wasn't struggle. It wasn't strife. It wasn't pushing. It was just, oh, okay, I could do that. Yeah, I was a little hungry in the afternoon, but I drank some extra water, right? Maybe you did use coffee. Coffee's good for you anyway, right? It's okay. And
with
then
no sugar
dinner.
or cream, I'm assuming.
Thank you. No sugar, no cream, no protein, no artificial sweetener either. You can use stevia or monk fruit if you want to, but definitely not NutraSweet or Splenda because those wreck your gut bacteria. And it's really shocking. And you see this look of wonder like, wow, I can't believe I thought I would die, right? But I didn't. I just did 24 hours. And as we talked about earlier, that's 1 meal a day. But if the next day you're like, I did it yesterday, I'm going to do it again today, and you're still just getting into it, you're probably not going to feel as good, right? So the next day, go back to 16:8, right? Like slowly work up to it. And what you're doing, it's like you go to the gym saying, I haven't worked out in 2 years, but I'm going to go do a full CrossFit workout, right? I'm going to do the full WOD. And then the next day you're laying on your back and you're like, I think I have to go to the hospital. My kidneys are overloaded with protein breakdown. I hate my life. It's because it's okay when you're exercising your cells the way fasting does. It's okay to just get started in a healthy, gentle way and work yourself up to this. I can fast for 48 hours and still be totally fine and have my brain work and do interviews like this. And I feel great. I can also eat and feel great. But before I'd eat and then I get the food coma and then you don't feel very good and then you got to have some sugar. That doesn't happen either. But if you just go all in and say, I'm going to start with a 10-day water fast, man, you're going to feel like crap. And the deal here is fasting is not about deprivation and it's not supposed to be about willpower unless you're doing a spiritual fast. And what I would say is do fasting in a painless way, which is a big part of the book, or choose to face the pain and use it as a spiritual personal development practice.
2 things will happen on your deathbed if you failed. You really went for something and you failed. 1, they will all mourn that you weren't able to live your life because you were so myopically focused on the goal that you forgot to enjoy the journey, and somewhere along the way you stopped loving. You stopped loving them, you stopped loving yourself, because all you could see was succeeding, getting that thing, the tick on the paper box, and you lost your way. That's possibility number 1. Possibility number 2 is they're like, hey, this motherfucker tried. And it was inspiring. And just to see them go day after day after day in the face of so much defeat, but to have the will and determination to keep going. Winston Churchill said, and I quote, success is going from failure to failure to failure without a loss of enthusiasm. It doesn't matter if you win, that's not success. The success is going from the failure to the failure to the failure and still being excited to show up. It's like, this is how I liken success. Success is like love. You know the beautiful part about love? Getting the shit kicked out of you and then coming back for more. That's so hopeful. That's so optimistic. To be like, whoa, I just had my ass handed to me, and yet I want to be vulnerable again. I want to go through this again. I want to open myself up to this. I want to be touched by that. I want to feel that. Fucking people can get behind that, man. We can get excited about that. We want to be friends with people like that. We want to feel that in our own lives, that willingness to have tasted defeat and still come in open and not jaded. How beautiful is that?
There's these 3 voices in your head that make you do everything you've ever been ashamed of. And they're coming from mitochondria and gut bacteria. And getting on top of that and just owning that that's awesome. But if you have to own it every day on top of everything else in your life, it's going to be overwhelming, and it's going to raise your cortisol, and you don't need to do that to get the benefits.
What are the three voices?
This is the algorithm that all life runs. It doesn't matter if you're a plant, it doesn't matter if you're a bacteria, which is what's powering us, or whether you're a deer. And the first rule is run away from, kill, or hide from everything. So that's fear. And you put 10 times more energy on that than is necessary, right? Because from the perspective of making a life form that will always be around, it should protect itself. And you protect yourself if you're a plant with hard shells or spikes or toxins. And if you're a bacteria, you use toxins or other defense things. And if you're a person, you think you're out of it. And the second F word, which gets about 5 times more attention than normal, is eat everything, because famines kill lots of things. So now we have fear and we have food, right? And that's why food gets so much attention when you're fasting, because your bacteria are like, eat that, eat that, eat that, eat that, eat that. And you're like, no, no, no. And eventually it's like a little kid wearing you down. And okay, fine, you can have half the cookie, Johnny. And you're like, why did I eat the cookie? I'm such a bad person. No, your mitochondria got the best of you. It's okay. And then the third F word, what else does all life have to do to make sure it's on the earth forever, Tom?
Fornicate, baby.
Oh, I was thinking fertility, but if you want to just go straight to
I'll go right there.
You're correct. So I actually was thinking of the other F word. I was just trying to get you to say it. So nice dodge. What's going on there is that gets about 3 times more attention than it deserves, right? And all life has to do it. And this explains everything you've ever done that you're ashamed of. Like all procrastination, all resistance, all not seeing things, all that's fear, right? Eating all the stuff you shouldn't eat, that's food. Going on that date you shouldn't have gone on, that is the other F word, right? And this is in our cells. This is not your brain. This is your cellular biology driving you to do it.
Our body has 5 very simple health defense systems that are that have now been discovered. They are, number 1, something called angiogenesis. That's blood vessels. That's how our body grows blood vessels. Angio means blood vessels. Genesis is how the body grows blood vessels. We've got 60,000 miles worth of blood vessels packed in our body. And these are the highways and byways of our oxygen, our nutrients, whatever we breathe, whatever we eat, in order for our cells to get the benefits of the critical elements of life. They have to be carried by the blood vessels. So that's so critical for our defenses. That's healthy. Number 2, our stem cells. When we were kids, we were told that starfish and salamanders can regenerate, but humans can't. And guess what? That textbook's been thrown right out the window, because humans do regenerate, just slowly. And we know that we regenerate because our hair grows back. Our skin can actually heal and grow itself back. But some of the crazy things that we're beginning to actually discover is that if you snip a piece of your lung off, it'll grow right back at the very tip. If you take away 2/3 of your liver, okay, let's say that you have a tumor in your liver, you can remove 2/3 of it, and that 1/3 will grow the rest of the liver back, kind of like crazy. A salamander's leg. It's crazy. And of course, our nerves will regenerate. And so biotech companies have been trying for decades now to figure out how to inject stem cells. Well, Mother Nature's already beat them to it, because stem cells are present in our body as a defense. And we're continuously regenerating ourselves from the inside out, repairing problems. There's a road crew inside our body, yours and mine, right here, right now, that are fixing things that are invisible to us. Third, microbiome. We can talk more about this. It's the tip of the spear of a whole new frontier about the human body that we're just beginning to understand. But the important part of it is that we know that when we've got good, healthy gut bacteria, and this microbiome is the ecosystem of our gut bacteria, I call it the Great Barrier Reef in our body. 39 trillion bacteria all living inside there. And what we know, the important part for your viewers and listeners, is that they help, when they're healthy, they help to lower inflammation in our body, which then lowers all kinds of disease. They help optimize our metabolism. Everybody's always worried about their metabolism. Good gut bacteria helps that right along. Fight fat, help to avoid insulin sensitivity and avoid glucose surges. All very important. Controls our hormones, so that our mood and our brain, so our mood is actually healthy as well, and can fight cancer and regulate obesity, all kinds of things. If our gut, by the way, it's so easy to disrupt the gut. I mean, think about a tanker spill that destroys, a coral reef. That's what we can accidentally do to ourselves by eating the wrong things. If you were taking a boat by the Great Barrier Reef and you were to take a bottle of toxic material and pour it right down on top of the coral reef, guarantee you that the fish and the anemones are all going to be dead. Okay. That's what we do to ourselves. So this higher level of awareness that we have to take care of our gut microbiome, so important for defending our health. Our gut defends our health. Fourth, our DNA defends us against the environment. So most people think about our DNA as our genetic code. Yes, it is. It is the blueprint for our proteins in our body that we inherited, half from our mom, half from our dad, et cetera, et cetera. However, the really cool unsung part of our DNA is that it's one of our body's 5 health defense systems. What does it do? It fixes itself. What do I mean by fixing itself? Well, if we go out, during the summer and you go to the beach and you are enjoying laying out, enjoying the weather, beach weather, the ultraviolet radiation is coming in and mutating your DNA. Now, how come we don't develop cancer all the time after going out to the beach? Because our DNA is hardwired to fix itself when it's damaged by the environment. And the beach is one thing, and I'm not even talking about the tanning salon, but I always ask people, when you're actually filling up your car with gas, like you're at the gas tank, do you stand upwind or downwind of the pump? And people go, huh? What are you talking about? I'm like, well, if you smell the fumes, the solvents, then you're standing downwind. And if you smell them, you're breathing in solvents that can mutate the DNA in your lung. So how come we don't get lung cancer? Because our DNA fixes itself. An amazing defense system that our DNA plays. And then finally is our immune system, which of course, after the past year and a half, everybody knows just how important good, strong immunity actually is. But most people don't know that even as we get older, our immune system still has the capacity of fighting invaders, not just outside invaders like viruses and bacteria, but inside invaders like cancer. So we are able to now, and this is one of the most remarkable things I've seen in my medical career, give people who have cancer, even metastatic cancer that's spread, immune treatments that by themselves don't kill the cancer, but uncloak the cancer so that your immune system can go after the cancer. And even if you've got metastatic disease, even brain metastasis, it's possible in some cases now for your own immune system to wipe out all traces of cancer and put you not just in remission. Okay, that's what chemo does, can put you in remission. But immunotherapy can actually turn the clock back and reset yourself so you don't have cancer anymore.
We've been talking to kids about rights, and we really should be talking to them about responsibility and what you owe the world instead of what the world owes you. Now, I'll frame it a little bit differently.
Well, we have to balance those, right? Because, even technically speaking, your rights are my responsibilities and vice versa. And so we can't only have half the dialogue because the responsibility enables the rights. So, it could easily be that we could be in a situation where we should be talking more about rights, but I don't believe that we are in that situation at the moment. And I think for me, that's being borne out by the fact that people have been interested in what I've been saying, because one of the things I've noticed time and time again is that whenever I talk about the relationship between responsibility and meaning, the crowds that I'm talking to go silent. Say, look, you need a meaning to sustain you through the vicissitudes of life. Okay, well, try to debate that. It's like, is life painful? Yes. Is it anxiety provoking? Yes. Is it uncertain? Yes. Is it painful beyond bearing sometimes? Yes. It's difficult. Everyone agrees about that. Now, they might disagree about how difficult, but that doesn't matter. That the central point holds. Okay. What if you think that's all pointless? Well, that doesn't seem very helpful. Okay, so you need a sustaining meaning. Well, where do you find that? Well, you generally find it in responsibility to yourself and to other people. And people ask themselves those questions when I'm talking, because I ask them to ask themselves those questions, and that's the answer. Well, what's meaningful? Well, I have a meaningful relationship with my father. I have a meaningful relationship with my wife. I have a meaningful relationship with my pet, because I take care of that pet. When I commit to something and make sacrifices, that sacrifice is something I also talk about a lot in both of the last 2 books. if something's valuable, you'll make sacrifices to attain it. And that discovery of sacrifice, I think that's what separates it's one of the primary factors separating human beings from animals. Because we discovered that we could let go of something we value in the present, and we would gain something we value even more in the future. We acted that out dramatically in all sorts of strange ways over thousands and thousands of years before it was formalizable psychologically. But it's a massive discovery. I can forego gratification in a particular way and benefit in the future. So I can share the proceeds of my hunt, and I store up future food in the form of reputation and the favors I'm owed now by other people. It's a massive discovery.